Brian Mast, Republican congressman from Florida, joins me now, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, a retired U.S. Army and veteran of the war in Afghanistan. He is obviously very grateful to our troops. The troops have been, we have been insisted upon that the troops, our U.S. troops, will not be entering Ukraine. But yesterday it was interesting. I want you to tell me what your thoughts were on Biden's reaction to a reporter that brought up sanctions and whether or not they were meant to deter Putin. And he said no, they were not meant to deter ever. And he got quite angry about that, despite the fact that White House officials have repeatedly insisted that that was the point of sanctions. I mean, what other point were sanctions meant for before the war?
Yeah, let's answer that in the context of him just speaking to the troops right now. He said they're the finest fighting force in the history of the world. That's totally true. But unfortunately, what the world sees, to answer his question, what does the world see when they look at us? They see the finest fighting force being led by a lamb and not being led by a lion. And if he's unwilling to even say, we were trying to deter Russia from entering the Ukraine, if we weren't trying to deter them, then what in the world were we doing? Were we just thinking about sanctions just for the fun of it, just something to maybe piss Russia off a little bit, or China, who they were working with? It's absolutely nonsensical to put forward this idea that his administration wasn't trying to deter Ukraine. We all knew that it wasn't going to be effective because essentially what they were doing was the equivalent of sanctioning a farmer without sanctioning their crops, but they're unwilling to look at the reality of the situation and acknowledge their faults.
Yeah, and if of all times, right now is not the time for there to be mixed messaging coming from the administration. After the White House repeatedly refused to commit to a red line, the president said that NATO will respond if Putin uses chemical weapons. How? We don't know. He didn't say. Only that he is calling on the G20 to expel Russia. Does that sound like we are taking a tough enough stance when we're talking weapons of mass destruction here?
No, in a situation where the world can't say right now there's a 0% chance of nuclear weapons used or chemical weapons used or 50,000 Ukrainians killed, the fact of the matter is Biden is unwilling, as you pointed out, to put forward any red line, whether it comes to them doing cyber attacks on our infrastructure or anything else. And that is him being a lamb, not being a lion, not being what people expect out of the United States of America, which is that show of force, that show of a line, where this is the line that which you will not pass. Biden will not be that.
What's your take on this? A former Zelensky campaign advisor said, and I quote, if you're Putin and you think Europe is going to crack in a month or 6 weeks or 2 months, why not? They can take anything for another month. Can they really? I mean, how many more civilians will have to die? How many more refugees are going to be forced out of Ukraine? How many children are going to remain homeless? How much longer can they endure?
The answer is there will be millions of more forced out. There will be thousands of more that die. Now, thankfully, we have a partner in President Zelensky that made this commitment. Is one of the most powerful things I ever heard him say. And he said, listen, if Russians are in the Ukraine, then they're going to be there by themselves, because that means every last Ukrainian has fought to the death. That is leadership.
Mm-hmm. The U.S. has offered help to Ukraine in many ways in the form of weapons, humanitarian aid, of course. But critics have said that President Biden needs to step it up. It's not enough. I want you to listen to General Keith Kellogg on this and react.
Let's give Ukraine a chance to win this. And why? Because that will reset the entire world, not just Europe, because the Chinese will pay attention to this. The North Koreans will pay attention to this. The Iranians will pay attention to this. So I believe you have a chance, probably once in a lifetime, to reset the stage, because I think the Russians are on their heels. And they're on their heels because nobody thought Ukraine could do what they're doing.
Iran and China will be paying attention to this. What message should we be sending to China and Iran?
We should be sending the message that we're not going to respond to Russia's if-then statements and stand by and do nothing. I think the general is right in saying we could reset the stage as to what Iran is doing with nuclear weapons, threatening the entire Gulf states and Israel, what China is doing with Taiwan, and the list goes on. We can reset that if we are strong, if we'll enable them. And I think if we do this, if we reverse engineer it and tell Russia and Vladimir Putin that no matter how long it takes, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, this is how it ends for him. He is out of power. Russia has conducted nuclear demilitarization. There's demilitarized zones along all Russian borders. They're out of the Ukraine, they're out of the Donbas regions, and they're out of Crimea. That is how this ends if you project yourself to the globe like Russia has done as of late.
Congressman Brian Mast, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
All the best.
You too.